This is another exclusive rock music star interview, conducted by Thomas S. ORWAT Jr.
Welcome to episode number 31 of the Rock Interview Series. I'm Thomas ORWAT Jr. It is August 12th, 2021, and today I have guitarist, singer, songwriter, composer, and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, Steve Hackett, as my special guest. During this exclusive interview, Steve and I discussed his two new releases, Surrender of Silence, which will be released on September 10th, and Under a Mediterranean Sky, which was released earlier this year. In addition, we discussed Steve's time in the legendary band Genesis, in which he was a member of from 1971 to 1977, and also Steve's band GTR, which also included Steve Howe of YES and existed from 1985 to 1987. We talk about this and much, much more. So here he is, Steve Hackett. Hey everyone, welcome to episode number 31 of the Rock Interview Series. And today we have a truly legendary performer with us today. We have none other than the guitar genius, Steve Hackett, with us. Steve, how are you today?
Oh, Thomas, how are you? Nice
Oh,
to talk.
I'm doing absolutely wonderful. Steve, during the last year and a half, you have probably been one of the most busiest musicians on the face of the earth. You recorded 2 records and released, and you're going to be releasing a record called Surrender of Silence on September 10th. And you also have a book that recently came out and a live record that came out. So we're going to be discussing all of those today. I want to start off by discussing the new single from it called Fox's Tango, which has some amazing guitar work on it. Your guitar actually screams on this track. Tell me a little bit about that track, first of all.
I was influenced by some of the slower things that I'd heard, slow and heavy music. I wanted to do something that used a slow rhythm that enabled you to be able to play either slowly or fast with it, and come up with some phrases that were memorable. I sometimes find that just one memorable phrase and the rest are salvos on something like that. I was influenced by all sorts of things with that. I mean, lyrically, it was the idea of fake news and the discrepancy between those who have wealth and those who don't. And I was struck by the notion that perhaps the world was falling into 2 camps, where one was going to end up being a prison camp, and the other half were going to own the keys. I just see more and more refugees. I see more and more misery, more and more things that make me angry, and the rise of fundamentalism, the divisions of religious fervor, people killing each other just because of mythology, almost, instead of taking things metaphorically, people taking things literally. We're back to Adam and Eve and the devil and all of that. I was appalled at this, the childlike thinking and the absolute acceptance of the divine right of one sect versus another. So it's an angry song. Other than that, it's an excuse for me to get the guitar out and have a burn up on the guitar and have fun with it. And put some of my anger and try and make the playing as fiery as possible. And I think compared to some other tracks that are on the album, which are more experimental and have the travelogue aspect, that one is pretty much straight ahead. I'm very surprised that the record company chose it as a single. It seems to me singles are like a kind of advert for an album, really. We don't really think of singles in the way that somebody releases a single and it becomes a hit. I don't think that's realistically on offer for me at this stage of the game. You know, I'm not a new kid. I'm not a new face on the block. I've been around the block a few times, so I've been in service for a while, but I still love passionately what I'm
Yeah,
able to do with it.
I think as far as releasing as the first single, I think it really captures a lot of people's attention. Again, because of the aggressiveness. I mean, the guitar work almost sounds like it could be a heavy metal song, a real good heavy metal song.
Yeah, I think I finally um, managed to get the shackles off to the degree where I'm not inhibited by the idea of doing all those things that at one time would have considered to be tasteless. So, you know, I'm flying in the face of many of the things that I learned with Genesis, where we influenced each other, and I think, you know, that was one way of doing a song. But you know, separate from that, if you take the sort of players based approach to songwriting, you can allow a tremendous amount of free form blowing. Um, but I like to think that there's energy in there as well. For me, somehow rock still affords, you know, a degree of freedom that I suspect with jazz, although I spend a lot of time listening to jazzers and applauding them. The idea of having a song, having a lyric, um, having a hook, having a melody, um, and to make it accessible for people is really important. But yes, it's probably the closest thing to heavy metal that I've ever released up to now. But then I suspect I'm probably on one level heading into a heavier direction. But at the same time, I make occasionally acoustic albums. So we did Under a Mediterranean Sky earlier in the year, which was, you know, very different. And it's lovely that there's been such a strong response to that as well. So that's another passion where the romantic side of things I can indulge, or I can create with, rather, you know, on a positive note. You can use all of the classical influences, all of the film influences, all of the flamenco stuff, the Segovia stuff, but then someone who grew up listening to Segovia and Jimi Hendrix, I figured that it should be possible to fuse the two. Although at one time they were very separate genres, and you know, you listen to one and it would be considered to be a guilty pleasure to the adherents of that one thing. Of course, Segovia was vehemently anti the electric guitar, whereas I think in the case of Hendrix, I suspect he was more open to the idea of what someone could do um, with their craft, orientated in another direction entirely. So I think maybe it's an accident of birth, the fact that he was a blues man. I suspect that, you know, born in another time and place, we might have heard very different music from Hendrix, but equally inspiring, because I actually think his real strength was as a songwriter.
Yeah, yeah, definitely doesn't get the credit that he deserves as far
Oh,
as his songwriting goes. Yeah, absolutely. I think
yeah,
that when people are multi-talented like that, it's usually like one aspect of their talent that people try to focus on because it's
yeah,
probably too mind-blowing to focus on all the aspects.
yes, yeah. So many things. Um, I suspect when you're in a group, you know, you're learning from other people, and then when you leave that group, as I did, there's still a side of you that thinks, oh, I wonder if Phil would have liked this rhythm. You know, would Tony have liked the harmonic progression? Would Mike have liked the guitar sound? Um, uh, but the competitive nature of groups working with each other means that it's not agenda free. Just because someone might come up with a good idea, it might not necessarily find favor within the group, because there are politics, agendas, all of these other things, even for the world's best group. It's that's what happens, and it's really only with solo work that somebody is fully allowed to express themselves. Someone like Phil Collins, of course, expressing himself within the context of Genesis wasn't really enough to show every conceivable side of his personality.
Mm-hmm. And is that kind of one of the reasons that you decided to release solo records while you were a member of Genesis?
Yes, ultimately, the idea of autonomy is the thing, where you don't want to be answerable or have to rely on the good graces of others in order to get something done. You can't do that. An orchestra doesn't work like that. Orchestras run on anarchy don't happen, apart from perhaps one moment in Sergeant Pepper where people have a free-for-all for a few seconds. The orchestra has got to serve the composer. That's the only way that it can work, and they all play as one because they have enough respect for the guy whose music that they're playing to get it right. So to win that respect can be very hard fought for. It can take a lifetime, but at the end of the day, if you've got a lot of ideas and you're dying to find out what they sound like, you can't really afford to have stillborn brain children. Put them to one side by all means and pick up your I Ching and go, there's an area devoted to that which has been spoiled. In other words, go back to an idea that wasn't fully developed. And then the other idea, of course, is that perseverance furthers. And all those ideas channeled in one direction can produce an amazing result. But you do have to be tenacious. So in that way, you make your own luck, I think. If you walk away from the table, the gaming table, you're no longer allowing Lady Luck to come around and visit you. So it's very important to try and stay in the game and keep the inner flame going and not allow the internal invalidator to talk you out of ideas that you know that are basically good. But you've got to stick to your guns.
Mm-hmm. You've really done a really good job of balancing your solo career and playing the old Genesis material in your shows as well, and keeping a lot of that material alive because the current Genesis hasn't touched a lot of that material since you've been in the band. So as a Genesis fan myself, I want to say thank you for doing that. And secondly, I think it's brilliant how you still play a lot of that music and devote a lot of your time on stage to that music and your brilliant solo work.
Well, thank you for saying nice things about both those areas. I loved the work that we did together with Genesis. I was a huge fan of the other individuals that I was working with, and there was surprising high quality of stuff that was coming out on a daily basis. At the same time, in order to stretch yourself fully, to have complete cooperation from your cohorts is something that perhaps can only really be done with solo work. Now, that doesn't mean to say I'm a complete dictator and a complete, I don't want to take over the world. If I play guitar on someone else's record, I realize that it's their name in lights and they've got to be pleased. I've got to do something that's right for them. That's the deal. And so I'll be completely cooperative with someone else. And when they work with me, I hope they'll be completely cooperative with me and suggest ideas that I haven't dreamt up. It's what they bring to it as an individual as well.
Hmm. One of the projects that you did work on that I was a big fan of was, and many other people were, was a project you worked on with Steve Howe in the mid 1980s called GTR.
Yeah.
Whatever happened in that project? I mean, it seems like you guys had a lot of momentum and it kind of just like fizzled out.
Well, it was very interesting working with Steve Howe. We had some great young guys who were in the band at the time. We creating that album, we had a fantastic job being done by Arista Records and Clive Davis, who was right behind us. So that was hugely important, but it did mean pleasing everybody, including the management. It was a hugely long process and very expensive. And so the level of success that we had, even though we had a gold album from that, it didn't really cover the expenses. And at the end of the day, I didn't want to be, a party to too many bankruptcies. That's the truth. So I decided that basically one studio album and one live album and one DVD, as it was at the time, was enough. At the end of the day, you're running a business, and that has to be, the gods of business have to be honoured. At the end of the day, you can't just keep spending money hand over fist. I mean, we were working in an extraordinarily expensive studio for 9 months. The album was supposed to take 3 months, and it took 9. And of course, it was just a very hungry child, and you can only burn your boats up to a certain point. But it was fun while it lasted, certainly. And I've worked with other guys from YES in other situations, with Chris Squire, for instance, and also with Pete Banks, who was the original guitarist. So I worked with a number of people from YES. I think there's been a lot of crossover in a way with YES and Genesis. Certain things, I've done a little bit of work with Rick Wakeman, some live stuff, TV stuff. So very, very interesting, the parallels perhaps between those two bands, although I suspect that Genesis was more song orientated, and I think YES was more player based.
Mm-hmm. Now, in researching the GTR era, I read that Brian May was approached to participate in that. Is that true?
Well, I would say that Brian and I we met, and I liked his playing very much. Who wouldn't? Marvelous player, and he said he very much liked my playing on the very first track that was ever released with Genesis from 1971 with Nursery Crime, Musical Box. Now that track, and he said that was an influence. And I realized that right at the end, there's a 3-part harmony guitar solo. And I thought at the time, these combinations of guitarists working together was a very good idea. I didn't think for 1 minute that Brian May was going to join GTR. I didn't think that was a goer at all. But we were talking about doing something together. I mean, in the end, it came out as something of mine, because I'd started an album and he joined. And then over time, we were involved in a couple of projects together. The other one was Rock Against Repatriation. So the stuff that we did together came out as Feedback 86. It didn't actually come out until about 11 years after the event, for various reasons. But I very much like working with him, and I love the guitar that he invented as well, which is extraordinary, for someone to build their own guitar at that young age.
Yeah, in addition to Brian May, you were also very influential on Eddie Van Halen Many say that you were one of the very first guitar players ever to use the fretboard tapping technique. How did you come across that?
Well, I was trying to play a line that was like something from Bach, from Toccata and Fugue. Now, I didn't sit down and want to do Toccata and Fugue from one end of the thing to the other, but I figured that the easiest way to play something like those phrases was to do it all on one string. And so I was doing it with the nail going on and off with the flat of the nail, and then pulling off with the right hand. So a series of hammering on and pulling off. And it's a technique that enables you to play lightning fast. I sometimes use the pad of the finger. I also have a ring I use on my little finger, and I sometimes hammer on with that as well. So there are different ways of doing it. And then sometimes two fingers. There's a technique with that. And I know the sky's the limit, and I think Stanley Jordan's probably the guy who I've seen who developed that technique most fully, and to tap on two separate guitars at the same time, and that's absolutely mind-boggling. But it's a way of being basically the fastest gun in the West, and I won't use the word tasteless when talking about speed, because I think that it has its place. You know, you should never say that, about someone playing tastelessly fast. I think that if you want to do a sort of dazzling salvo, go ahead. Just don't do it all night, because people get very tired of hearing your extraordinary technique coming at you all the time. Learn when to pull back and go, maybe a good song, maybe a memorable lick now and again, a hook would suffice. Otherwise, it reduces all music to the same level as sport. Shaving nanoseconds off the 440 or the whatever, the 100-yard sprint. I mean, yes, you can sprint all you want, but there's an awful lot of it about now.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a song, not a gymnastic event. Totally. There are a lot of the guitarists in the 80s kind of like fell prey to that, unfortunately. And
Well, great. I mean, I like watching a fast guitarist, seeing someone do something fast, but it can be a one-horse trick. I mean, I'm probably as guilty of it as anyone else. You're working away on something, and then suddenly you're going crazy with it, and your fingers are burning up. Before you know it, you've recorded something that other people might think is completely impossible. But I can understand why not everyone's grandmother might enjoy that.
right. One of the things that you also accomplished during the last couple of years is you put out an autobiography, and it was called Genesis in My Bed. How gratifying was that for you to get that book out?
Well, it had been a long time coming. My wife my wife Jo had encouraged me to do that. But I started something 15 years ago, and she said, you really do need to finish this off. And just before the American tour, the last American tour we did, I had it basically finished, but I thought I rushed towards the end, and then we had to finish halfway through our American tour because the pandemic struck. Everywhere closed down, so we came back after. We were 2 weeks into a month-long tour. We came back to the UK, got the last flight back from Philadelphia, and that gave me a little bit more time to work on the book. It's quite difficult writing a book, because just to remember what you've said
Yeah. Did you get any feedback from any of the other members of Genesis on your book?
Absolutely not. No. Genesis doesn't do feedback. Genesis does competition. It's the nature of the band. The most Genesis will do is to privately congratulate each other if they like a track that each one of us has done. But that's a very private thing. Publicly, it's another matter. Publicly, it's this competition that goes on in the nature of like a sort of public jousting match almost. But privately, yeah, we ease up every now and again and go, yes, yeah, that would be nice. Yeah.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, I'm a huge Genesis fan, and one of the things I often wonder about is what would have happened if the five classic Genesis members remained together all these years, and what
Yes.
kind of music would they have made? Do you think of that yourself at all? Wondering what the possibilities could have been if you guys remained together?
Well, there are two ways it could have gone, and it may have ended up with phase cancellation. I mean, at the end of the day, you need everyone's cooperation to do things, and groups are only cooperative to a certain degree. I mean, I joined a songwriters cooperative, which was Genesis, in the early days, I think, before people were having families and doing solo albums. It was perhaps easier. I made a solo album first of all, and I don't think anyone was expecting it to be a success, but it was. And instead of making my life easier within the band, it made it more difficult. So I'm not sure that bands staying together really works after a certain point. Or you could say I should have stayed, and Peter Gabriel should have stayed, but he didn't, and I understand why he left. He didn't believe in composition by committee. So ultimately, his belief was in a solo career. Composition by committee, ideas arrived at by committee don't always produce the brightest ideas. In fact, it's this very difficult thing. I think at its best, Genesis was you know, a world beater. It really was something. I mean, the standards were extraordinary. You know, extraordinary things that we explored together. But I saw things that would often be put on the back burner or trashed, you know, because of politics. And I think when you grow up, you outgrow the need for that. You outgrow the need for permission. So what I'm trying to get across is the idea of autonomy was increasingly becoming the thing that I needed to have in order to do all the albums that I've done since, in lots and lots of different styles. You know, I can't imagine Genesis doing a fraction of things that I came up with on my own. And I love what the individuals have done. You know, they've all done great things. So I can't, you know, publicly do anything other than praise them as individuals. But then, you know, collectively, it's one thing. Individually, it's something else.
Mm-hmm. Steve, I want to thank you again for your time to do this interview. My last question I have for you is that over the years, we have heard rumors of the 5 classic members of Genesis getting back together and going out on at least a tour. How close did that come, or was that not really anything that happened?
The last time we seriously tried to do that was in 2005, and there wasn't enough common ground to agree a way forward. So sadly, I think that it's not enough for me to be extremely flexible. It does really require everyone else to be the same. It didn't happen, and it may happen sometime in the future. Hopefully, when everyone's still in sound mind and body, and we're all here on this planet at the same time, it might happen one day. I'm not standing in the way of it, but you know, I choose to honor the work that I did with the band in one way. I present the music, and it's agenda free, and it's politics free. I just do what I think is the best music that we wrote when we were an albums band, and that's what I choose to celebrate. So on the tour that I'm undertaking, I'm celebrating the 1970s album-based version of the band, whereas I think in the main, Genesis became a very successful singles machine, and great production, etc. But you know, the ideas I think were perhaps more experimental, and there were more risks being taken at a time when it was the kind of music that inspired future generations of musicians. It depends what is your goal, you know, to have a #1 single, or are you after something that creates a legacy that other musicians will follow, perhaps? So I do try and preserve the music that I think was hard fought for then, and it's worth preserving now. I mean, I think that when I was in the band in 1973, I was convinced that I was in the world's best band. You know, the last few albums we've done, those 3 albums, when we were doing the best of that stuff. In other words, Nursery Crime Foxtrot selling them by the pound, I thought not really a band to touch us at this point for sheer ideas. So I thought that was absolutely wonderful, a golden period for the band. Not to say that the other albums haven't got moments of great distinction, but I was more drawn to that area, and that's why I was touring Selling England 18 months ago.
All right, Steve. Well, I thank you very much for your time. Hopefully, hopefully we'll see you in North America in 2022. Is that a possibility if everything goes well?
Yes, yes. We're doing a British tour in a month's time in the UK, and then I hope that having done some stuff in Scandinavia and in Europe, I hope we'll be doing some stuff in the States once again, because yeah, it's been too long and we love doing it.
All right. Thank you again, Steve. There he is,
Thank you.
everyone. Steve Hackett.